Good morning, it's me, Mr. Truman, back again for another installment of geometry. Today we're going to be looking at rotations. This is the third installment of this particular chapter of transformations. In our first section, we learned about reflections, where we took a pre-image and we maybe reflected it over the y-axis, over the x-axis, maybe even over a line. Some of them we did diagonally. Those were called reflections, and that was our first section we covered, our first transformation. Our second transformation we covered was called translations, which was a change in position for like a shift left and right, up and down, or a shift of left and right, shift of left and down, or right and down, or whatever. But anyways, a translation was just shifting its location. Well, today we're going to look at something called a rotation. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a pre-image and we're going to rotate it around the origin. I'm going to focus primarily only doing rotations around the origin, and I'm also really going to focus on only making 3 particular rotations in 90-degree increments. So we're going to look at our first one over here, which I've drawn up our pre-image, A, B, and C, and we're going to rotate this 90 degrees. So let me go over the symbols we use, and in this particular text, and I think the new current adopted symbol is to use a lowercase r that is not in cursive. And I make sure to say that because it used to be in different textbooks. In fact, we had a textbook a few years ago that used a capital R that was in cursive. And that used to be, I think, the symbol for rotation. But now we seem to use a lowercase r that is not cursive. And the capital R is our reflection. So what we do is in the parentheses, we write 90 comma, and then that's not a 0, that's actually O for origin. And then parentheses A, B, and C, which means we're going to rotate the entire figure A, B, C, not just parts of it, every bit of it. So as we do this, I'm going to show you what's happening, but there's a couple things I want to clarify first about rotations. When we rotate 90 degrees, I haven't really specified exactly which way I want you to go, and I do need to understand that when we rotate, we are actually going to always be rotating. If you think about when you learned in algebra class the quadrants, this was quadrant 1, and this is quadrant 2, 3, and then this is quadrant 4. As we learned our quadrants, we actually learned a little bit about something called a unit circle, which I'm not going to go into depth on right now. But when we rotate 90 degrees, we actually go from quadrant 1, for example, in this picture, since it's in quadrant 1, we're going to rotate this entire figure into quadrant 2. So when I say 90 degrees, I actually want you to always go counterclockwise. Follow the quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4. Follow that order. All right, so our current pre-image is sitting entirely in quadrant 1. And I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, which is going to put it entirely in quadrant 2. And I need to rotate the entire thing. So if you can imagine me taking it like if this was my hand, and the whole thing is swinging around on a pivot that is the origin. All right, so like if you notice, B is at the top of the figure, if you will. And when I rotate it, B is not going to be pointed this way. That's going to be that's going to point left. Whereas this points down. When I rotate it, it's going to point this way. Everything's kind of changing its position because the whole thing is rotating 90 degrees. So the way you achieve that is you have to take and you have to switch the X and Y values. I can't keep the X and Y values themselves in place because that would be a reflection. And we're doing a rotation. We're swinging the whole thing around. So to do that, what I do is I take my A value, or my 1 and 2 in for my A coordinate, and I'm going to switch them to 2 and 1. That's going to move them. That's going to help the figure turn on its side. But remember, I'm rotating from the first quadrant to this quadrant. And when I get to quadrant 2, what do we know about the values over there? The first one is negative. So the rule is that you switch the values and you make the first number negative. Now for the second one, for B, I'm going to have 7 negative, comma 4. So again, I switch the numbers and put a negative out front. And then on the last one, because that's a 0, there's no negative 0, so I'm just going to write 0 and 6. Now when I draw this out, Watch how the figure takes the entire thing and it shifts around, rotating like I just Like I pulled it around on that axis, just around the origin. So let's look. -2, 1 is A. -7, 4, B. Making sure to put those apostrophes so that we note that it's our image, not our pre-image. All right, and the last one, 0, 6. So when I connect all those, like I talked about earlier, the B that was at the top is now going, it's kind of pointing that way. The C that was at the bottom is now kind of pointed this way. And A didn't change a whole lot because A was the closest thing to the origin, so it just kind of spun around. But overall, you can see that that is a 90-degree rotation. So once again, we always go counterclockwise because that's the way the quadrants are labeled. And when you get into trigonometry, that's the way the unit circle is labeled. So we always go counterclockwise. So 90 degrees, even though nobody says anything, it's going to be counterclockwise. So if you think about what I just did, and rules, as far as the rules go, I took and I switched the x value with the y value, and I made the first value, which in this case was the y value, negative. So that's the rule to rotate 90 degrees. Well, let's think about that when we rotate 180. 180 is really doing a 90 degree twice. So if you think about it, if I was up in quadrant 1, I'd go from quadrant 1, where I'm positive, positive, to quadrant 2, where I'm negative, positive, and then I would end up down in quadrant 3, where I'm negative, negative. Well, each time I'm switching or rotating 90 degrees, remember I'm taking that x and y value and I'm flipping them back, I'm switching their position and changing the first sign. So the first time I do this, if you imagine, I switch once, make this one negative, and then that second 90, I switch them back, and now this one has to become negative. So essentially what happens is, you keep the x and y, you just simply make them negatives. So when I go ahead and write this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the a value 0, 5, I'm just going to make them negative. And since I can't do a -0, I'll just have to only change the 5. All right, and then b value, let's see, that's going to become +3 and -2. And then the c value will become 1, 1. So let's keep track of where this is at and where we expect it to be. Right now, for the most of it, the bulk of this pre-image is in quadrant 2. Remember, 1, 2, we're going to have to make sure we really keep track of this stuff. We're mostly in quadrant 2. Well, if I rotate 180, I'm going to go 90, and then I'm going to pull most of it right into this quadrant 4. So let's look at the values. All right, over 0, down 5, so that's going to be my A prime. Oh, gotta make my symbols. I need a different color. I don't want to use the same color. I gotta switch it up a little bit, so we get a feel for what the image looks like. All right, 3, -2, and 1, 1. And if you look at the image, it has completely shifted 180 degrees, where A was pointing up at the top of the triangle, and well, now the new A points down. B was pointing to the left, now it points to the right. And C, once again, being the closest to the origin, just simply spun around. And that is how we rotate 180 degrees, which is really, again, just doing 90 twice, switching once and then switching back. So all I really do is change the values from whatever they have to the exact opposite. So if they're both positive, now they're both negative, and so forth. All right, well, our last one is 270 degrees. So let's think about that again. What's really happening is we're going to rotate 3 times. We're going to switch once, switch twice, and switch a 3rd time. Well, if you keep track of how this is following on my chart here, the first time I switched them, the second time I switched them back, and now again, 90 degrees, what's going to happen? They're going to switch again. But this time, when they switch again, I'm not going to change, because remember, I'm only changing 1. So this time when I switch, and you can see it's the exact opposite from the 90-degree rotation. You switch the X and Y, but instead of making the first value, you make the second value. And that's because I followed the pattern of switch once, switch twice, and now I'm going to switch 3 times. It's a lot to keep track of. So that's why we have our little foldable for class. So let's look at the values. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to write them down. So we have -2, comma, -3. I'm going to write them as we do, as they are. But remember, I'm switching the second value. 90 degrees, I switch the first value. All right, for B, 0, -5. Switch that second value, so now it's just 0, 5. And then C, -4, -6, and then switch it. I like to leave it just the way it is and literally copy them down, and then I just make my quick sign change by either taking my eraser and just erasing it or adding a negative as I'm needed to do. All right, so let's draw this out. Now remember, 90 degrees means that if I took this image, or pre-image that's currently sitting in the quadrant 3 position, I gotta go 90, 90, 90, which means I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3 times. This is essentially the same thing as just going 90 degrees clockwise, because I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, or I could just say I'm going backwards. Either way. So when I look at this, I got -2, 3, 0, 5, and -6, or -4, 6. And I just rotated it. Essentially, I've rotated it this way. All I've done is go clockwise. And that is rotations. So I hope this works out for you. I hope I've explained it all. And see you tomorrow or whenever.